Hi, welcome to our online discussion of March 4, 2016.
Hello.
This is Amy Asbrook, the director of Toujours Vivant Not Dead Yet, and I'm Christian Debré. So, Toujours Vivant Not Dead Yet is a non-religious organization by and for people with disabilities and our ally. Our goal is to inform, unify, and give voice to disability right opposition to assisted suicide, euthanasia, and other ending of life practices that discriminates against people with disabilities. Today's topics: the Vulnerable Person Standard initiative is launched. As a second subject, assisted suicide bills die in 6 states in USA. And the third one, contact your MPs. So, I give the voice to Amy Asbrook.
Thanks. Okay. So the Vulnerable Persons Standard Initiative is launched. On March 1st, 28 organizations launched an initiative called the Vulnerable Persons Standard. This document is a series of safeguards drawn up by 30 doctors, lawyers, and activists, including leaders in the disability rights community, to protect vulnerable persons from the dangers of assisted suicide and euthanasia. Because there is dangers. Right, exactly. And one thing they made sure to say is that even though some of the organizations still believe that assisted suicide and euthanasia are wrong and they disagree wholly with them, they felt it was important to participate in the process of developing safeguards so that people who are vulnerable will be protected. Effective safeguards. Right, effective safeguards, not the kind we talked about last week. According to their website, these safeguards will help to ensure that Canadians requesting assistance from physicians to end their lives can do so without jeopardizing the lives of vulnerable persons who may be subject to coercion and abuse. So in this way, they identify the dangers, coercion and abuse, or at least some of them, and they're saying that allowing some people to have assistance with suicide doesn't mean that it should be a danger for other people. So that's what they're saying. Authors of the standard include disability rights activist Catherine Frazee, palliative care specialist Dr. Harvey Chochinov, both of the federal expert panel, and David Baker, the lawyer who pled the Carter case on behalf of the Council of Canadians with Disabilities. Organizational supporters include CCD, the Canadian Association of Community Living, and the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition. So in this committee, there is a former member of the provincial group. The federal group. Expert panel. Okay. And those are the ones that came up with the good recommendation. Well, they were not allowed to come up with recommendations. They were told just to gather information. Their mandate was cut short by the election. So they just came up with information, but they had a pretty good perspective on what was going on. So 2 of those people were on this group. It was a really good expert group with different people and organizations supporting it. So this is a very good standard. Yeah, impressive. The standard is based on the idea that problems and unmet needs should not be the cause of death. Such problems include, and here there's a whole list of them. Yeah. Social and mental health issues causing distorted thoughts and judgment, like depression, hopelessness, loneliness, fear, grief, and shame, and being coerced by others, and the power imbalance of the doctor-patient relationship. So all of those are dangers that we're trying to avoid by making this vulnerable person standard. Another set of dangers we're avoiding is the lack of access to disability-related supports for dignity, comfort, and self-determination. And if you remember, that was not mentioned in the recommendations last week, those disability supports, and we took them to task over that. Because obviously when when a lot of people are asking for assisted suicide because they are losing their autonomy, that's a disability-related issue. Another danger that we're trying to avoid is insufficient or inaccessible palliative care options to alleviate pain and suffering and improve well-being of patients and their loved ones.
That's a kind of minimum to give access to everybody to palliative care. If you don't have access to palliative care, if you suffer too much or you receive bad care, you may have choice to die.
Right. And if you remember last week, they didn't talk about providing palliative care to everybody. They just talked about building up the palliative care system.
So it's not fair for everybody.
Right, exactly. Another problem that this standard is going to try to avoid is poverty and unemployment, which can cause significant mental anguish, social stigma, and a sense of hopelessness.
Yeah, unemployment over disability people is around 75%, not 7% or 8% for the rest of the population.
Right, exactly. And so since people with disabilities have such a high rate of unemployment, such a high poverty rate, there's a lot of stress that goes along with that, and that stress can drive people to want to die, especially if somebody is just becoming disabled and loses their job. Another problem that this is trying to solve is the physical, mental, and emotional abuse, and also financial abuse and fraud, especially affecting elders and people with disabilities.
Yeah, every week in newspaper, you find an abuse case in some nursing home somewhere. It's unbelievable how many there is around the country.
Right. So the standard would address these problems in various ways. And the first way is to provide equal protection for vulnerable persons. And the law would include a preamble affirming that all lives, however they are lived, have inherent dignity and are worthy of respect.
Basically, it's just the Charter of Rights of Canada.
Well, yeah, but it's also saying it's going against this idea that disabled lives are less worthy than other people, and this idea of it's better to be dead than disabled.
Yeah, but in the Charter,
right,
it's clear that it's for everybody.
Right, and this is neutral. It's not just about people with disabilities. It's also about poor people, and it's about people of color. And basically saying that all lives have equal, right,
other people.
First Nations people, and basically saying all lives have equal value and dignity. Secondly, the law would be carefully regulated and publicly reported. And that's important because having public reporting means that everybody knows what's going on.
That's very, very important. Comment on appelle ça? En anglais, recensement.
Census, the census.
We do census because the country need valuable information to take good measure against or for many things, several things.
So we know what kind of programs to develop and who needs what services. And
for the most important one, the one who say death or life, you say, no, I don't want to have any information at all. That's something really dumb.
Right. So we would have independent, we would have public reporting, independent research into social impacts of Canada's assisted death policies will be promoted, financially supported, and publicly reported. Any adverse impacts or any problems with the law which cause harm and disadvantage to Canadians or to Canada's social fabric will be addressed without delay. So the public reporting and research into how the law is working is to keep an eye on things. And if there's any problems identified, instead of just saying, well, you know, there's a problem.
Look at it somewhere, sometime, I don't know. No, you have to do it right now.
Right, exactly. The Parliament would have to address it without any delay. Okay, so the second way that we're going the way that the standard would be addressing things is by guaranteeing that the people have end-of-life conditions. So 2 doctors must independently assess the medical condition of the person as grievous and irremediable, meaning an advanced state of weakening capacities with no chance of improvement, and that the person is at the end of life. And that definition comes directly from the Quebec definition.
And it's kind of the minimum definition. Even that is a little bit weak because the ending of life is not directly defined.
Right.
So a good lawyer could play on it and extend it as wide as he wants. But at least there is a beginning.
Right. And the reason this is so important is because in the Carter decision, they talked about
extending the life of
right.
the
idea of this, of allowing assisted suicide, is so people would not have to kill themselves before they really want to die. And
not shorten the life of
right,
people.
Not shortening their lives.
Yeah.
And the idea is that people might kill themselves before they're ready to die because they would become incapable of killing themselves at the end of life.
This is the basic thing that the court should have answered. And
right.
They didn't answer that.
Right, exactly.
That was the question, and it doesn't answer.
Right, so this is why it has to be the person near the end of life. Also, the physician who makes these decisions must have specific expertise in the person's medical condition, as well as the range of appropriate care options. They must have met with the patient and diligently explore their request. So you can't have a podiatrist or a dermatologist
to take decision over somebody who have
with cancer
or
ALS.
Or somebody very complicated.
Right, exactly. The person has to have training and experience relevant to the person's condition, and they also go ahead.
That's just logic.
Right, exactly. And they have to have met with the person and really explored the request, not just put a rubber stamp saying, okay, you've asked for it, you got it. And finally, the provision of palliative care options for all Canadians with end-of-life conditions will be prioritized, so making sure that people get palliative care, and the impact of the practice of physician-assisted death will be subjective to ongoing rigorous attention. So again, that goes back to, keeping records and making sure that no problems come up, and making sure that people have access to palliative care if they're at the end of life. Now, the third way in which these are going to be addressed is through voluntary and capable consent. And this standard is calling for, in looking at the request, physicians must separately attest that the person, one, has made the request independently, free of undue influence or coercion.
Yeah, nobody break their arm to say sign, okay?
Right. Or, the person doesn't have a whole family around them saying, well, who's going to get what, who's going to inherit what, and that kind of thing.
Or too hurry to inherit, and two impatient nephews saying, hey.
Or we sure wish grandma would hurry up and kick off so she doesn't use up all our money.
And think about it. You know that it's happening.
Right, exactly. Two, the person has to have the capacity to make the request. So the person has to be conscious, obviously, and has to have the mental ability to understand what they're asking for and to take the decision to die, because it's not a medical treatment that they're asking for. They're asking to die.
They will not just miss a pill. They will die.
Right. And, sometimes people have kind of unclear ideas. They they think about, well, my family's going to be all around me after I die, and, everybody's going to be at my funeral. But people aren't necessarily understanding that when you're dead, you're not at your funeral.
No, and you don't look to anybody going to your family.
Right. You don't get
everybody around will look at each other, but you will never see it.
The person has to be informed and understands all the alternatives, so has to understand what the diagnosis is, what the prognosis is.
You suffer too much, we have way to diminish your suffering or eliminate it completely.
Right, and the person has to know what treatments are available and all the alternatives.
Yeah.
And that the person understands the alternatives. So instead of saying, do you understand? And the person says yes, they have to make sure, explain it back to me.
Yeah,
So,
doesn't mistake euthanasia and
withdrawing palliative care.
Palliative care.
Right.
There is a lot of people who mismatch it. A lot.
Right.
They think that medical aid of dying is palliative care, which is not.
Right, and they also think that it's just withdrawing medical care, but it's not. That's not it either. It's actually killing the person, which is a different thing. Like a lot of people say, oh, I don't want to be stuck in my body, blah, 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 and don't understand that they can refuse medical treatment.
And die fast.
Right.
And with relief.
Right, they can have palliative sedation and they can refuse medical treatment.
Yeah.
And finally, the person has been supported to pursue any acceptable alternatives, including palliative care. So those are the 4 things that have to happen in order for there to be voluntary and capable consent. And, if this were my document, I would add something about, the person has had a psychological evaluation to make sure they're not depressed or they don't have drug interactions, but this isn't my document, so.
But in the document, a lot, and most of the things are things that we fight for since more than 3 years. 3 years.
3 years, yeah. These are things we fought for a long time. A doctor must attest at the time when medical aid in dying is administered that the person has the capacity to give consent and that the consent is voluntary and certain. So not just when the person asks for it, but when the person gets it. So this eliminates the possibility of advance directives. But it makes it so the person has to, at the time that they want medical aid in dying, they have to ask for it again, and they have to be sure that that's what they want, not changing their mind every day or changing their mind from hour to hour, depending on how much pain they have.
Which is happening quite a lot of time. People, when they are close to dying, sometimes suffer a lot and have different good days and bad days, and in bad days they say, I want to die. And the next morning they feel well, they feel better, and say, oh, I want to see my grandchild or something like that. They change their mind sometimes every hours. Okay, but changing their mind in that way, it's not possible. When you're dead, you're dead.
Right, exactly. You don't get to come back when you feel better, because you don't. In all discussions related to physician-assisted death with the patient, neutral, independent, and professional interpretation services, including American Sign Language and Langue Signe du Québec, must be provided as required. And I would also add that if the person needs any communication devices, that needs to be required as well.
It should be available.
Right, exactly. And none of the recommendations that we read last week talked about that. But
easily available. Not only it is a decision somewhere. No, it's easily available on the spot.
Right, right. And oftentimes when you ask for interpreters or if you ask for a communication device, they look at you like you're, asking for the moon.
Yeah.
The use of advanced directives to authorize physician-assisted suicide would be prohibited. And the reason for that is people change their mind. If you sign a document and then 15 years later you end up in a car accident and you break your neck and you're semi-conscious and somebody says, well, they signed a do not resuscitate order 15 years ago, so I guess or not a do not resuscitate, euthanasia directive, then I guess the person wants to die. But you might have changed your mind in that time. So.
And removing a document for the chain of paperwork in the government,
right.
It's something
can be very difficult.
Yeah, very, very difficult.
Right. It's not just a matter of taking one paper out of a folder and tearing it up.
No, it's everywhere. When you send it on this cloud, big cloud, you never know what you will find. And sometimes what you find, it's not the real things.
Right. If it's in the computer record, you don't know where it might appear several places.
Just as an example, from a bank, okay, I receive in the wrong address since 15 years old or more, once a month letters that I tried many times to eliminate it, and the bank doesn't know how to do it. And it doesn't know even why it's emitted to me. And it's still coming on, even if I try many times to remove it. And it's very simple, that's basic. The other thing is more complicated because it's more official.
Right. And another way that this vulnerable person standard is going to be carried out is through an assessment of suffering and vulnerability. And that means two physicians must, after consultation with members of the patient's extended healthcare team, attest that the person's experience of enduring an intolerable suffering is the direct and substantial result of the grievous and irremediable medical condition. So that basically means the person's suffering because of what's wrong with them.
Yeah.
Pretty much. But one thing to note here is that they talk about consultation with the person's extended healthcare team. And that can mean anything from a psychologist or psychiatrist, a physical therapist, occupational therapist, a nurse, or any number of people who work with the person. So that's what they mean when they say extended healthcare team. And the idea that they're trying to get to is that if psychosocial factors such as grief, loneliness, stigma, and shame, or social conditions such as a lack of needed supports for the person and their caregivers are motivating the person's request, these will be actively explored. So it's not they're just going to say, well, you've got all these problems, but we'll give you assisted suicide anyway.
Yeah.
Every effort must be made through palliative care and other means to alleviate their impact on the person's suffering.
You play with the life of somebody. You have to be serious.
Right, exactly. So this is saying we're looking beyond just the, is the person suffering? Yes, no question. We're looking at why is the person suffering and is there anything we can do about it before the person gets a yes or no answer to
Is it
request.
existing a palliative treatment of any kind?
Right. Is there any way that we can provide in-home supports that would enable the person to stay in their home and continue to want to live?
Is it a way to give a little bit more money to this person so this person could live in her home to the end or something like that?
Right, exactly. So also we can maybe provide some services so the family doesn't have to provide all the caregiving and they can go back to work and so the house can have an income. That would be good. And the final way that this standard is going to be implemented is through arm's length authorization. So it's not just the two doctors. Every request, along with all related clinical assessments, are reviewed by a judge or an independent expert body.
The way they want.
Right, with authority to approve or deny the request for assisted death.
You have a story about somebody in the west of Canada who died a few days ago.
Right. There was a woman in Calgary who actually wanted to die, and she went before a judge and she explained the reasons that she wanted to die, and the judge authorized her. She had two doctors and they both said that her reasons were that she had enduring suffering and all that, and a judge approved her request. And that's exactly the way we want it to continue working after the new law comes into effect.
So if it's possible now, it could be possible in the future.
Right,
Easily.
exactly.
You just have to want it.
Right, exactly. Let's see. Sorry, I stopped in the middle of this sentence.
Sorry, my fault.
Okay, it's okay. Or the request, that they would deny or approve the request for assisted death, or request more information prior to making a determination. So what if the judge had more questions and wanted to ask the person more questions? That's another option. The decision will be made on an expedited basis. That means accelerated, fast, appropriate to the person's life expectancy, and with a degree of formality and expertise appropriate to the circumstance.
Yeah, it's kind of logic. If a guy had to die within 2 weeks, don't take a month to give a decision and have two doctors and a judge. You need it in a day.
Right. So if the
in a single day.
Right. If the person's going to be dead within, if the person's suffering and they're going to die within 3 days, then you call up the judge and you ask the judge to make a decision. But if the person has a month left to live, then you could go for a week, and the judge can make the decision as soon as possible within that time.
It have to be proportional.
The reasons for the decision would be recorded and reported for each decision. So again, reporting on the decision so that there's a public record, so that we know what's happening with the law, and when there are problems, we can deal with it. And that was not part of the recommendations that we talked about last week.
We doesn't really need the personal information. What we need is medical information, which is not the same. We need the name of the doctors, we need the name of the judge, we need the date, we need the reason why, but the name of the person itself doesn't really matter.
Right, exactly. And the other thing that we need to record is if the person's gone to 3 doctors who all refused their request before they came to the final doctor who approved it. Because if that's the case, it may be that the person isn't really eligible and the doctor who's approving it is making a mistake.
Or the doctor may be a dead doctor.
Right, exactly.
It could happen, and we have to be protected against it. And don't say it doesn't exist. Sorry, guy, it is existing.
Right, exactly. The legal provisions for exemption the legal provisions for the assisted suicide law are in the to ensure pan-Canadian consistency, including definitions, criteria for access, requirements of vulnerability assessments, and terms for independent prior review for each have to be consistent in each province and territory.
Yeah, even for separatists of Quebec, which I am, okay, we are still Canadian, and all Canadians should be equal. That's the law, and that's the Constitution.
Right, and so it's better that there not be confusion between 2 parts of the country. If you go to one part of the country, you have to have the same expectations as if you're in a different part of the country. So as happened in this case, this woman got approved in Calgary, in Alberta, but she went to British Columbia for the euthanasia because she couldn't find a doctor in Alberta who would do the thing. The organizations supporting the vulnerable persons standard are hoping the members of parliament will adopt it as part of the law to govern assisted suicide and euthanasia. So this is essentially our response to last week's recommendations by the Special Joint Committee on Physician Aid in Dying. This is a response that I think is pretty well thought out. It's going to protect a lot of people. It doesn't put any major barriers in the way, and it would create a better law, I think, in the end.
I think so.
For more information about the Vulnerable Person Standard, visit their website at http://vps.npv.ca, and that's V as in Victor, P as in Paul, S as in sugar, dash, N as in Nancy, P as in Paul, V as in Victor.ca.
And don't worry if you don't get it. Just go to YouTube and you could hear it again, or there is a text published in our website. We
send out a text on Mondays, so if you want to see the text, send an email and we'll give you the email address at the end. And we'll put you on the list to receive the text for our webcast.
There is many ways to get it, so don't worry.
Okay. So the next topic is assisted suicide bills die in 6 U.S. states. Now it sounds
good news.
Yeah, it sounds like a disaster report, but actually it's good news. So far in 2016, assisted suicide bills have died in 6 U.S. states, according to Not Dead Yet and the Patients' Rights Action Fund. In Maryland, this week, assisted suicide proponents withdrew legislation, noting to the Associated Press, "It became clear that the measure did not have enough votes," unquote. The bill author further mentioned that it was unlikely that a new bill would be introduced next year due to strong opposition.
Yeah, so there's a lot more people opposing than people who are for it.
Right. He was, I think they were surprised at the amount of opposition that they found, and people from Not Dead Yet testified against that bill. And they were surprised because Compassionate Choices and Dying with Dignity have a lot of money, but the other side produced a lot of opposition. So
yeah, so there is money and few people, and at the other side that there is a lot of people without money. And when democracy is running well, the number of people should win.
Right. Well, it's there are a lot of people, but for the amount of money they spent, there are a lot of people, and their arguments are good.
Yeah.
Opposing assisted suicide is good social policy, while supporting it is not good social policy. In New Jersey, following an aggressive 2-year campaign effort by assisted suicide supporters, Bill S-382 was shelved. Democratic Senator Peter Barnes noted publicly, "There was never a groundswell of support for this bill."
Yeah, that's a defeat.
It's not what he was saying while he was pushing the bill, of course, but it's what he said to cover up the end of the bill.
Because he realized that there's a lot more people opposing it than people who are in favor of it.
Well, I think what he realized is that the people who were opposing had some really good arguments, and that the dangers are a lot worse than people think they are.
And one of the trouble of Canada will vote a law, it's kind of a slow boomerang. It will hit the Canada at the backside of the head in few years, and you will see.
Right, exactly. The dangers will come out, and people will be very unhappy. And actually, it's kind of interesting because already people are a little worried from the recommendations from last week, because that we talked about last week, because some people are saying that allowing people with psychiatric disabilities to have assisted suicide is going too far.
Yeah, it's a lot too far, and it annoying people, really annoying people, in detail. So people are in general for some people, but not in this case and not in this case. And the other one, in another case, they are against. But if you look at the global things, you see that people are against.
Right, exactly. What people are in favor of is not being forced to have treatments that they don't want, which already they don't.
Yeah, but they doesn't know it.
Right.
And
Exactly.
they mistake some terms. Medical aid of dying and palliative care.
Right.
There is a mistake over there. We know it. There is at least one survey about it, and it's obvious.
Right. The one survey that Christiane is talking about was a survey that a lot of people thought that medical aid in dying was palliative care. And so people don't understand what they're voting for when they vote for medical aid in dying. Okay, back to the United States. In Iowa, after a brief February debate and opposition testimony from cancer survivors and others, the bill failed to move through a Senate subcommittee.
It doesn't even pass the subcommittee.
Right. In Colorado, a bill that would have legalized assisted suicide failed in a Senate committee last month. A few weeks later, the Colorado Assembly failed to take up the bill because there were not enough votes to pass it.
Same thing.
So Colorado, it failed as well.
Even just a committee.
Right.
Doesn't even go to vote.
And there was a big mobilization of Not Dead Yet in Colorado as well. And people came to the State House and testified on the bill there as well. So that's part of the reason that it was defeated. In Utah, following testimony, a bill to legalize assisted suicide was unanimously sent back to the Rules Committee, killing the bill for the
unanimously.
Yep, for the remainder of the year. In Arizona, similar to previous attempts to pass assisted suicide legislation, a new bill once again failed to get the support needed to pass the Senate's Health and Human Services Committee. So after all the bad news from Canada, it's nice to hear some good news,
Yes,
even if it only means that we're holding the line against assisted suicide and euthanasia.
And we should realize that there is a lot more states and countries who does not allow euthanasia and assisted suicide than country who permitted it.
Right.
Which supposed to be, it's not supposed to be legalized in any way normally.
Right.
If you have good quality of care and
if people understand their right to refuse treatment.
yes, and all the right people have already. When they realize it, they doesn't need those kind of things.
Right. People have rights already that prevent them from being subjected to treatment they don't want.
Yeah, and palliative care of today are very, very efficient, which not everybody know it.
Right, exactly. People say they're afraid of dying in pain, but in fact, the reasons given by people in Oregon who request assisted suicide have more to do with disability.
Yeah.
So that's why we always talk about making sure there's palliative care and disability supports. Okay, our last topic is contact your MPs. Now that we have the vulnerable persons standard, it's a good time to contact your MP. Visit the Parliament's website at http://parl.gc.ca for phone numbers and email information, or send a free letter to your MP, no stamp necessary, to and on the envelope you write the name of your member of Parliament, House of Commons, Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, K1A0A6. So that's how you get in touch with your MP. So to view our videos, find them on YouTube or use the search engine of your choice and put in the terms euthanasia and disability. To participate live, send us your email address and I'll send you a link to join us, and that'll arrive about 15 minutes before the program starts. And you can email me at info@tv-ndy.ca. For more information about the subjects we discuss, go to facebook.com/toujours vivant, not dead yet. You can visit our website at tvndy.ca. You can send me an email at info@tv-ndy.ca, or you can follow me on Twitter @TVNDY. Thanks very much for being here, and we will see you next week. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody. Take care. See you. Bye.
Bye.